Why make me imagine this, Kevin? Maths and science are awesome. They bring us a greater understanding of the world around us, and they're the backbone of all of human civilization. So much so, in fact, that we have a tendency to take them for granted instead of writing off a lot of science and most maths as being nerdy pursuits with no real-world applications. Yeah, exactly. Real-world applications of mathematics. Please, Kevin, who wrote today's episode. I just read it. That's the format of the show. If you're new here, welcome. And to be fair, that's partly true. Having a deep knowledge of astrophysics or understanding of the lazy caterer's sequence, that sounds interesting, actually, is unlikely to make a difference in your day-to-day life. Hell, even if you're a lazy person who happens to be employed as a caterer, the sequence, which tells you the maximum number of pieces of cake or pizza you can make using only end cuts, it wouldn't even be useful for you, as the resulting servings are emphatically not uniform in size and would piss off your customers. That said, back when people figured out how levers and pulleys worked, it absolutely transformed society. Can you imagine being the dude who discovered, leverage? Just guys, look, if I get this really big stick and use it like this, I can make powerful things happen here. People would be like, holy shit. Archimedes? And most people use algebra on a daily basis, usually without even realizing that they're doing it. Not if I can help it, Kevin. These branches of knowledge are so fundamentally ingrained in modern society that we just overlook their importance, but one of the best things about maths and science is that they are not immutable. Even if we have established a set of rules that we believe to be true, new information can always challenge these notions, resulting in an even deeper understanding of the universe. Of course, there are still certain things that have been proven to such an extent that they're unlikely to ever change. 1 times 1 is always going to equal 1, no matter what insane mathematical proof Terrence Howard. Oh god, he's like the guy who's like
1 times 1 equals 2.
And he's just off his fucking rocker, dude. I saw him talking about this shit on Joe Rogan. And I'm like, wait, is that the guy from Iron Man? And then didn't he get fired from Iron Man, allegedly, for just being a bit insane? Allegedly, perhaps, don't know, just making that up. History is full of people who incorrectly believe they'd revolutionized maths and science, or sometimes with their rather insane theories actually catching on with the larger scientific community. I don't think Terrence Howard has to worry about that. Let's talk about some of them. Have you ever Googled yourself and found your phone number, your address, even your legal history on random websites? I mean, not my legal history, because I've not been in any trouble. But I mean, if you have, it's probably there. And I don't know, you Google yourself and it's why is this information? Why is my address there? I don't like that. This is really weird stuff. But Incogni, today's sponsor, is a service that scrubs your personal info from the internet. And here's what makes their unlimited plan different. It lets you submit any link where your data appears, even sites outside of their usual list of data brokers, which honestly is pretty massive anyway. You find the link, Incogni does the rest, reviewing, requesting removal, and emailing you when it's done. They've made it stupidly simple to take your privacy back, even from sites like whitepages.com, trellis.law, or dnb.com. Just give it a try and you'll find that info is gone. Take back your personal data with Incogni. Use the code BLAZE at incogni.com/blaze to get 60% off an annual plan. And now, back to today's video. Alfred Lawson, Lawsonomy. The Life of Alfred. He also named it after himself. The life of Alfred Lawson is interesting, to say the least. He was born in London, but as a teenager he made the sensible choice to move to the vastly superior Boston, Massachusetts. Yeah, if he just moved to Boston in the UK, you'd be like, why'd you move here? The only reason I know about Boston is because a friend of mine's from there. As far as I know, it's a nothing town. He never mentioned anything interesting about Boston, other than the fact that there's a much more impressive Boston across the pond. They didn't even have to call it New Boston, because no one gave a shit about the original Boston. He didn't have the opportunity to stay very long, though. On May the 13th, 1890, Alfred took to the mound as starting pitcher for the Boston Bean-Eaters. Who the fuck's I'm going to name my baseball team after people who eat beans? Called the Boston Farty Farts, an early name of the Boston Braves before they moved to Milwaukee and later Atlanta. The game did not go well, with the Bean-Eaters losing 7-2, and Alfred was traded to the Pittsburgh Alleghenies. He pitched 2 games in Pittsburgh, losing both, one of which was a 14-1 loss with 3 errors by Alfred, at which point he was busted down to the minor leagues. I don't know what any of this means, but obviously that's a bad loss. That actually worked out for him, and Alfred played in the minors for 5 years, later becoming a manager. In 1908, he even founded his own baseball league, the Union Professional League, to rival the American and National Leagues. That went about as well as his major league career had, and with a single month, the league had folded. Yeah, I get the feeling like starting new shit like this is really hard. Unless was it Saudi Arabia who were like, no, we're making the new PGA. It's like PGA 2. And they're just like, well, how are we going to do it? We're just going to throw hundreds of millions of golfers to leave the PGA and come and play on our thing. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of baller, to be honest. But that's okay, because Alfred isn't most famous for his career as a professional. I'm just waiting for the person like Saudi Arabia to be like, we're launching YouTube, but we're calling it Saudi Tube, Simon. And I'll be like, well, that sounds a bit shit. And they'll be like, Simon, we're going to pay you $400 million to come out. They'd be like, Saudi Tube it is, baby. When do I move to Riyadh? But that's okay, because Alfred isn't most famous for his career as a professional athlete. He's best known as one of the leading pioneers in aviation. He is? Just months after his baseball league collapsed, Alfred began writing, editing, and publishing his own aviation magazine called Fly. Creative name. That was a bold decision, as planes were still an emerging technology. In fact, when Alfred began publishing his magazine, exactly 3 Americans had flown in an airplane: Wilbur Wright, Orville Wright, and their friend and mechanic Charles Furness. Honestly, that sounds like the perfect time to start a magazine about aviation, because you're like, well, I'm definitely going to be first. And I get the feeling that this aviation thing could become a big deal, just maybe, perhaps. Charles was the world's first airline passenger, just a few months before Alfred began publishing Fly. I guess if he's the first magazine, he can just call it whatever the fuck he wants. Fly. Alfred then became a pilot, changed the name of his magazine to Aircraft, a word he had completely made up. No way. This dude came up with the word aircraft and also coined the word airline. Oh shit, okay. Put some respect on this guy's name. He began lobbying Congress for funds so that he create his own airplane company, and essentially created the commercial airline industry by being the first person to build a plane specifically designed to carry a large number of passengers. Granted, a large number back then was 18. Well, given that they're basically flying like a paper aeroplane with a motor stuck to it off some like hill in Kitty Hawk, the idea of putting 18 passengers in a plane must have seemed like downright unbelievable. But the first ever commercial flight was actually a few years earlier, with a single dude riding with a pilot. So it was a major improvement. So far, it sounds like Alfred was doing a lot of the right stuff. So where did things go wrong? Well, it began in 1920 when the Lawson Aircraft Corporation built its pride and joy, the 26-passenger Midnight Liner. Unfortunately, the plane never flew. Takeoff kept getting delayed by inclement weather, but the company was in dire straits financially. Rather than waiting out the weather and paying to transport the plane to a suitable location, you don't take risks like this in aviation, especially early aviation. Alfred instead ordered that they take off from a nearby runway that was only 300 feet long. It turns out that's like 100 meters. It turns out that 300 feet wasn't long enough for the Midnight Liner to take off, and instead it crashed into a tree just past the runway. On the bright side, nobody was injured. Really? Is because they were all killed? It was impossible to acquire more funding after that little mishap, though. Apparently they all survived. Alfred did keep designing more planes, however. The largest was a 100-passenger double-decker plane, which was certainly ambitious for its time. No shit. But with no funding, by the late 1920s, Alfred shut down his airline and turned his attention to economics, philosophy, and science. This guy's just like, he's just polymathing it up, isn't he? All of Alfred's ideas were collected into a system that he called Lawsonomy. While I normally claim that people who name things after themselves are tyrants, Alfred had the tendency to write about himself in the third person, so this was more just your run-of-the-mill but very annoying narcissism and self-aggrandizement. People who write about themselves in the third person, not ironically, it's fucking weird, dude.
Anyway, and if anyone points to the About Me page on my website, I'll be like, yeah, but I want to pretend it wasn't written by me. Well, it was. You can probably tell by the bad grammar.
Anyway, Alfred had some pretty big ideas to start with. You know that guy Albert Einstein of E=mc² fame? No. Total fucking quack if you asked Alfred. You see, energy wasn't real and had no place in Lawsonomy. Instead, he developed an entire new framework for all of physics based on the idea of penetrability. Alright then, to be fair, I have a lot of ideas on the topic of penetrability too.
Where are you going, step bro?
But the only one related to physics is that Kevin! No! Kevin says spit is the best lubricant.
He's right, you know.
Why make me imagine this, Kevin? According to Alfred's theory, the two forces in the universe were suction and pressure. Kevin, there's another joke in there somewhere, isn't there? And those forces caused currents that enabled all motion. Motion was defined as being zigzag and swirl, which sounds like someone's patented blowjob technique. Oh my god, the number of sexual references in about 7 lines is impressive. Rather than a term that should exist in physics, I can't actually find a coherent definition for what zigzag and swirl even means, but that's fine because it's not like any of this is coherent in the first place. But he wasn't just revolutionizing physics, Alfred also believed that he could solve all of the world's economic problems by disallowing banks from giving loans and having that become the responsibility of the government instead.
You sound stupid!
To be fair, federal student loans are way better to deal with than private student loans, but the real solution there is just to make higher education free. I'm not sure that having the government own your mortgage or small business loan is a great idea. Is it worse than a bank owning it, though? Because while I feel like the government's not profit-driven, where banks are, so it's in their incentive to screw you, whereas I think the government's just like, who cares? We're taking your money anyway, bitch. Typically, the government is the one borrowing money from people in the form of saving bonds and stuff, not the other way around, so this just doesn't feel like the sort of business the government should be involved in. I mean, there's no reason that it shouldn't be explored, though, as an idea. Oh yes, and even more important than recreating all of physics and designing the allegedly ideal economic structure, Alfred also discovered the secret to living for 200 years. I guess he did. I mean, we all know he's still around today coming up with his brilliant ideas. We're pretty sure that's actually impossible for humans, and Alfred died at the age of 85, which didn't help support his theory. That said, he claimed the secret was basically just vegetarianism, and specifically only eating raw foods. That's a weird claim to make, because there were people that had already been sticking to that diet for spiritual or religious reasons for like a century at this point. None of them lived to be 200 years old or anything close to it, so it's unclear why Alfred thought that doing the same thing that somebody else had already done would yield vastly different results. Well, they didn't, did they, Alfred? Because you died at 85, which, pretty old for back in the day, but not 200. Then again, he did claim that he possessed the sort of true intellectual superiority that only comes along every 2,000 years, and that he would bring humanity a few steps closer to the one true God. Alright, mate. You need to chill out, bro. You need to take a pill that makes you less of a douchebag. So I guess his brain was operating at such an advanced level that someone like me could never possibly comprehend his genius. Or put it another way, as I've stated many times before, I can't understand the thought process of crazy people. Yeah, if I take a lot of time, I can understand the thought process of really smart people. Because you're like, well, they got there somehow, and if you just spend enough time walking me through it, I'm going to eventually at least see where they're coming from. But when it gets to crazy people, you're like, this break, this doesn't work. No. Alfred's teachings mostly sounded like incoherent ramblings that would take an eternity to decipher, so it's no surprise that earning a degree from the University of Lawsonomy was a 30-year endeavor. Honestly, I'm not sure that's long enough to figure out what the hell he was talking about, especially since he provided no research or evidence for any of his ideas. It's pretty difficult to restructure all of physics simply by using the trust me bro attitude as your justification, but that is just the kind of ego that Alfred had. At one point, the University of Lawsonomy, I thought that was a joke. This is actually something that he set up and had a 30-year degree, had about 2,000 students enrolled, though it was less of a school and more of a vegetarian commune bordering on a cult. He was also a cult leader. Holy shit. I mean, you can't accuse this guy of being boring, can you? That was what the US government thought anyway, as they revoked the school's tax-exempt status before Alfred's death. And if you're wondering, yes, there were a small handful of graduates from the university's 30-year program. Those unfortunate souls were rewarded with degrees certifying them as knowledgians, a made-up word from a made-up school. And Natalie Akimov and Gennady Shipov, torsion fields. Torsion fields sounds real. That sounds like a real science thing, like, quantum mechanics, which is a real science thing. People love words that sound all sciencey, like torsion fields. Kevin and I, same page. In this specific case, it really helps that torsion tensors are a thing in differential geometry, and the Einstein-Cartan theory, presented as an alternative to general relativity, contained fields that involved the torsion of space-time. I'm not sure why Einstein became affiliated with a theory that was designed as an alternative to his own theory, but I guess it's good that he was keeping his options open, especially since there were multiple solutions found to his field equations. I would just say that that's good science, my dude. Like, if you're open to ideas and your thing being wrong and maybe something else being right because you're not sure, that's just being a good-ass scientist. But that is all real science, and we're not here today to talk about real science. Of course we're not. We're here to talk about nonsensical bullshit that sounds like real science. Basically like any episode of a sci-fi show. And that is precisely where torsion fields come in. These fields were proposed by Soviet scientists Anatoly Akhimov and Gennady Shipov. Akhimov specialized in nuclear physics and applied physics, while Shipov's areas of expertise were theoretical physics and general relativity. These are proper scientists, then, assuming they actually have these degrees and pursue these things. This is like real science. And realistically, having a duo containing one theoretical physicist and one applied physicist is a good idea. However, they were empowered by the government-run Center for Non-Traditional Technologies. That sounds like a made-up supervillain government operation, and as a result, I guess they felt obligated to come up with something non-traditional. Building on the theoretical fields from the Einstein-Cartan theory combined with mathematically inaccurate solutions to the Maxwell equations, not exactly a brilliant place to start, Akhimov and Shipov presented their reality-altering theory of torsion fields. And according to the two scientists with very real PhDs in physics, torsion fields were basically magic. It's hard to explain, both because their theory involves incredibly advanced physics and also because their ideas were just incoherent pseudoscientific gibberish, but let me see if I can break it down for you as best I can. According to Akhimov and Shipov, there were 7 layers of reality. On the uppermost layer, you had solid objects followed by liquids, then gases, and once again, this is not a great place to start with your theory. Maybe something was lost in translation from the original Russian text, but describing solids and liquids as different layers of reality is the sort of theory I would expect to hear from a dude sitting in the corner at a party because he's tripping way too hard, not actually from real Soviet scientists. I don't know. Maybe they were real scientists who also loved LSD? Anyway, the 4th layer of reality was elementary particles, then a vacuum, then torsion fields, and then absolutely nothing. So far, this honestly isn't that crazy. We have particles and vacuums and fields do exist in vacuums, meaning that vacuums are different from absolutely nothing. In fact, a true void of nothing, not even fields, isn't believed to even be possible with our modern understanding of physics. What made this theory real insane, however, was how Akhimov and Shipov decided to define torsion fields. According to them, torsion fields contained neither matter nor energy, yet they were somehow able to transmit information. Oh wait, because they said it was magic. I was literally going to say, like, by magic? More than that, they were able to transfer information at effectively infinite speeds, well beyond the speed of light. So, quantum entanglement, right? I don't want to say there's something to this, but there is something to information traveling faster than the speed of light because of quantum entanglement. Look, I don't know. This is just, my knowledge of physics is from science fiction, so grain of salt, everybody. Normally, information, typically in the form of energy, traverses fields via waves carrying that energy, but because torsion fields were said to have neither mass nor energy, it meant that there were no waves that had to travel throughout the field. Instead, the information in the field existed at every point in space-time simultaneously. Now, that'd be really cool if it was possible. But it isn't possible. It doesn't help that this theory provided no evidence for what it was claiming, it was built on incorrect equations, and makes no logical sense. For example, Akhimov and Shipov claimed that the information was transmitted via neutrinos, but neutrinos do have mass, and thus would be unable to reach the speed of light, let alone travel a billion times faster than light. These guys had real PhDs, like, not from the University of Online... What's that famous online university? I can't do it without naming a real university by accident. Let's say they were somehow correct though. What would this mean for humanity? In a word, everything. Faster than light travel? Oh yes. Stargates? Makes sense. Homeopathic cures that actually work? Yes, please. Telepathy? Telekinesis? Levitation? Sure, why not? Ghosts? I'm not sure what they had to do with physics, but Sure, literally any bullshit you can think of, no matter how impossible it may seem, was somehow believed to be possible thanks to torsion fields. This singular pseudoscientific theory was believed to be a magical panacea that could bend reality in any way a person wanted, even if it was just to give themselves a 27-inch cock.
Don't look at it unless you want to see Big D.
Though admittedly it would have been fun to hear Mae West say, "Is that a torsion field in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?" I don't know who Mae West is, but I know this thing. Like I said, though, there was absolutely no evidence to support this theory. Well, there was technically some evidence that Asimov and Shipov had presented, but in 1991, a fellow scientist revealed that all of the evidence had been falsified. Again, making me doubt whether they are real scientists. It turns out that having cutting-edge physics the capitalists' pigs in America hadn't yet discovered was a high priority on the Soviet government's to-do list, and Asimov and Shipov had received millions of dollars in government funding for their research. Once their colleague outed them for faking their research, they were charged with embezzlement of public funds. Oh no, that's so Soviet. They're like, guys, go make up some shit that the Americans will believe. So we look super advanced ahead of them, and they're like, "Yes, comrade, I will go and make." And then they go and make, and then they get called out, and the government's like, "Yeah, now we're suing you for fraud because you did exactly what you told us to do." That's the most Soviet thing I've ever heard. The only thing that would be more Soviet is if they end up in a gulag. I doubt they were formally charged, since neither of them was executed, but an investigation by the Soviet Committee on Science and Technology did declare, in no uncertain terms, that their research was a bunch of bullshit that relied on using complex scientific words to confuse people into thinking it must be important. You know, like the dialogue from any episode of Star Trek.
I will break you!
But the problem is, there are people who also have PhDs in physics. You're not the only ones. And one of them is going to be like, whoa, say that again? Whereas on an episode of Star Trek, no one's like, whoa, hold on, say that again? Never happens. Oddly, or perhaps predictably enough, despite this theory being 100% discredited, it still remains popular. There is no scientific reason anyone should believe a theory that was presented with zero evidence and defied the known laws of physics, but it is a bunch of science words that are used to allegedly explain the existence of things like ESP and homeopathy, so of course, some people are still going to buy into it. Yeah, people are just a little bit more dumb or desperate or gullible. Alistair Hardy, aquatic ape hypothesis. I feel like I've heard of this one. Like aquatic apes? Is this about us coming from the sea or some shit like that? By this point, evolution is a near universally recognized concept in science. There are still some places in the deep south of the United States where evolution is considered secular nonsense meant to dissuade people's belief in an all-knowing, all-loving God, but most of the world can see the abundance of evidence supporting the theory of evolution. We even have a pretty good idea of exactly how it happened. Scientists have determined all sorts of evolutionary lines, the approximate years of specific mutations, and so on and so forth. But it hasn't always been this way. When scientists first began to accept evolution, they didn't have a lot of answers. The theory made sense, and there was reasonable evidence for it, but the fossil record wasn't nearly as extensive 100 years ago as it is now. This meant that with the adoption of a new theory containing lots of gaps in information, it was time for some pretty wild speculation. I mean, when you don't have all the information, speculation's fine. As long as when information contradicting what you speculated comes up, you take it into consideration. Because otherwise it's just bad science. A lot of this involved the potential existence of a missing link, fossilized remains that would bridge the evolutionary gap between modern humans and other great apes, particularly chimpanzees, which are our closest relative. As it turns out, there was no missing link to find, at least not by that definition. Humans did not evolve directly from other apes. Instead, humans and the other great apes evolved from a yet unidentified ancestor several million years ago. Ooh, have we still not identified that? Oh, that's cool. Oh, one day we're going to discover that. Maybe. That'd be pretty awesome. And then there were dozens of different species of humans before modern humans evolved, including a surprising number of species that were alive at the same time as us. Yeah, that would have been so weird. There's like another species that is like intelligent, like properly intelligent. Not like dogs. Shut up with your dogs. Like properly intelligent, like a person. Like can come up with real science. And there'd just be another group who are kind of not quite our same, like really, really smart chimpanzees. Like from Planet of the Apes or some shit. Is that what Planet of the Apes is about? I've never seen it. And we interbred with as many of them as possible because humans are nothing if not horny. Like I said though, we didn't know all of this back then because the fossil record was so limited. As a result, one possible theory of the evolution of humans, first conceived by British marine biologist Sir Alistair Clavering Hardy in 1930, was the aquatic ape hypothesis. However, he kept the theory a secret for 30 years. Why would he do that, you ask? Well, basically he told a couple of colleagues his ideas and they all told him to never repeat what he said ever again if he wanted to have a career. It's like, Alistair, no. This is going to look bad for you, my dude. Don't. After 30 years, he didn't say a word. He became a respected marine biologist and was knighted, and it was only after accomplishing these things that he decided to reveal his hypothesis to the world in 1960. As the name might suggest, the theory proposed that humans evolved from a line of apes that diverged from other great apes by moving into the water.
Oh, life being better down where it's wetter is tight.
Not necessarily on a permanent basis, but Alistair believed that these aquatic ape-like ancestors would spend several hours at a time in tropical seas or rivers. I mean, it doesn't seem insane. Like, this doesn't seem like Terrence Howard, 1 × 1 is 2.
The calculator says 1 × 1 doesn't equal 1.
According to the theory, these ancestors were driven out of the trees by competition with other primates, and they subsequently fled to the sea where they adapted to life in the water. Is this why it's like, he's kind of like, well, why don't we have fur? We've got this slick skin for movement through the water. And if you think about it, but not too hard, modern humans have a lot of adaptations that would fit an aquatic lifestyle. To start, humans are effectively hairless. Kevin and I are so often on the same page. I love it. Obviously, some humans, like Simon, are more hairless than others. Steady, but our hair is mostly meaningless. I'm sure someone is angrily and accurately typing a comment right now that we have the same number of hair follicles as other apes. That's roughly 5 million. Yes, but they don't grow f***ing hair, like proper hair, do they? Just look at the two and be like, oh look, it's clearly different. But the vast majority of our hair is vellus hair. That's really fine, short hairs that are often referred to as peach fuzz. This covers your body, but it's so short and thin it's basically invisible. The other type of hair, the stuff on your head, is called terminal hair. My hair was terminal. And that's the type that covers other apes and hairy mammals. It's argued in the aquatic ape hypothesis that this hairlessness was an adaptation to make us better suited for the water. A related adaptation is our ability to sweat and cry. Oh. Wait, monkeys and other primates can't cry? Other primates do this, but humans can sweat far more efficiently and have 10 times as many sweat glands. Alistair argued this was an adaptation designed to remove excess salt from our bodies that would be absorbed by spending hours at a time in brackish water. No, this was because we used to do exhaustion hunting, right? It was like our evolutionary advantages. We could just run and just keep moving while other animals get tired. And we just basically tire them out until they can't do it anymore. And they're like, if you're wondering why I said those two traits were related, since they don't particularly appear to be, it's because of the function that anthropologists believed they actually served. According to mainstream scientists... Mainstream scientists. Sounds like a bunch of government-bought and paid-for losers. Humans evolved living in the hot savannas of Africa that lack significant tree cover for shade. As such, both hairlessness and advanced sweating mechanisms allowed humans to better cool our bodies. And sure, maybe that makes sense as an explanation, but if humans didn't evolve from aquatic apes, then why do we have webbed fingers? I don't think we do. Obviously, they're not webbed like a frog or anything, but there's still a little bit of webbing. Oh, come on. Like this? It's not webbing. Naturally, this makes sense as an adaptation to spending so much time in the water, and maybe the fingers on the aquatic apes were even more webbed, and that webbing just receded as we spent time on land. Now, that's certainly a theory a person could propose, but there's a much simpler solution. The small amount of webbing that exists between our fingers is just there to keep us from cutting ourselves. Okay, if you had absolutely zero webbing, then whenever you stretched your fingers apart, it would cause the skin between them to stretch and probably break. Oh, gross. Alistair's hypothesis just kept going, attributing pretty much everything you can think of to being the result of living an aquatic lifestyle. I mean, what about not being able to breathe underwater or hold our breath for particularly long? Like, you put someone underwater, they're gonna die real fast. Humans have subcutaneous fat like whales and seals. The shape of our noses prevents water from getting into our respiratory system, and humans generally prefer to missionary rather than doggy style. What? Yes, that last one was really part of Alistair's proof, and no, I'm not sure why. I think it has something to do with the weightless effect of being underwater, or maybe dolphins were the only other animal that What are you talking about? Have been observed having sex while facing one another at the time. Today, the only other animals we know to do missionary are dolphins and bonobos. It's so specific, but I'd wager that this has a lot more to do with humans being the only bipedal mammals than to do with whatever the fuck Alistair was thinking of. Perhaps the most important evidence, however, was humans' diving reflex. If you've ever seen a baby get baptized by being fully submerged in water, you may have wondered, wait, babies, when they're baptized, get fully submerged in water? I thought they just splash some water on the baby's head. Granted, I've never been to a baptism, so I guess I wouldn't know, but really? That seems pretty intense. You may have wondered why they didn't drown, or perhaps why this is even legal. Indeed. It's totally safe though, because babies are born with a natural instinct to hold their breath underwater, something that absolutely would make sense for an aquatic or semi-aquatic species. So, on the one hand, Alistair's ideas sort of made sense. The fossil record was sparse enough that we didn't know exactly how humans got here, and there are a bunch of traits that make sense as adaptations to aquatic life. And since all of these evolved traits could be explained by a single external pressure, wouldn't Occam's razor tell us that the simplest solution is just probably the best? Unfortunately, that ain't how evolution works. Evolution causes a bunch of random shit to happen. I mean, science is Occam's razor is fantastic, but I feel like when you really get into the depths of things, the simplest explanation is not what it is. Everything is mostly empty, right? Because you got that nucleus and then you got those electrons going around the outside. But you're like, no, that's pretty solid. Occam's razor says this is solid, so atoms aren't a thing. It's no, it doesn't work. Although anyone saying that would have to be really dim, but I'm sure there are people. There's a lot of really dim people. Dimmer even than me. Evolution causes a bunch of random to happen, and the traits that provide a competitive advantage get reproduced and propagated throughout the species. But it's slow and it's random, so having all of these traits evolve simultaneously just does not make sense. We also know roughly when each of those traits first appeared as well, and they don't line up with being caused by one single thing. There were also far better explanations for all of these traits, many of which I've already told you, and the explanation for the diving reflex is that being submerged in water is kind of like being in the womb, so of course a baby's body would know how to react in that situation. The reflex also disappears after about 6 months, so it's only marginally useful anyway. Wait, babies forget to hold their breath underwater? I didn't even know that. Now at this point, you may be thinking, well, wait a minute, Kevin, if the diving reflex is because being underwater is like being in the womb, well then wouldn't all mammals have that instead of just humans? And the answer is yes. Yes, they would. And they do. And that brings us to the biggest problem with this theory, and the likely reason Alistair's colleagues told him to never speak of this nonsense again. Alistair's entire theory is based on the presupposition that all of this stuff was unique to humans, or at least extremely rare outside of humans, but that's not even remotely true, and people already knew this at the time. The majority of this stuff, like web fingers and subcutaneous fat, are true of all primates. You don't generally see fat gorillas in the wild, but gorillas that live in captivity with access to all the food they want absolutely do pack on the pounds. Pack on the pounds with a gorilla. It's funny for some reason. Despite never being taken seriously by anthropologists and being immediately classified as a crackpot theory by the scientific community, the aquatic ape theory has continued to have lots of supporters in the lay community, probably because it's a simple theory to explain a lot of complicated things at the same time. René-Louis Vallée. Synergetic theory. And that's just my guess on his name pronunciation, because I'm not French and I don't care enough to look it up. The work of René-Louis Vallée was described by his contemporaries as incomprehensible, so I'll do my best to make it at least vaguely coherent. Alright, good luck with that, Kevstar. But don't worry if my explanation of Vallée's theories is confusing, because that means you're in exactly the same place as physicists were when they tried to read his work. Anyway, Vallée began his career as a respected scientist. He graduated from Supélé, a prestigious engineering school in France, after which he spent several years working in the private sector. In 1958, he was hired by the French Atomic Energy Commission, or CEA, and he wrote several books about his work there. In short, Vallée was living the dream of every scientist. He was gainfully employed, publishing research, and even gone to work at CEA while France developed nuclear weapons. It sounds like everything's going great. What's he do now? I have to say, when I started recording this video, I didn't think it would be actual scientists who lost their shit and came up with some crazy stuff. I thought it would be like Terrence Howard, a mediocre actor who thinks he's solved mathematics. That last part may not have actually been the dream of most scientists. I hear Einstein had a few regrets, but personally I think it would have been pretty darn cool. And actually, lots of scientists agreed. Yeah, look, nuclear energy, really good. Nuclear weapons, also arguably quite good. Because, I mean, sure, they've killed a lot of people, but they've also saved a lot of lives because we're not, we're not doing all these regular wars because we're like, well, if you do that, we do this, and then boom, everyone dies. Mutually assured destruction, baby. I know Oppenheimer's famous statement, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. This quote, I just find it a bit cringe. It feels a bit edgelordy, doesn't it? It feels like he thought about it a bit too much. Like, I don't know, I feel like I'm the only person who feels that way, but it does. Let me know if this also feels cringe in the comments below. I feel like Oppenheimer should have cringed when he said that. It's usually interpreted as him feeling guilty about what he had done, but that was very much not the case. Oppenheimer was like, no, fuck yeah, I'm destroyer of worlds, baby. You're gonna fuck your shit up. Oppenheimer was proud as fuck about what they had built when he quoted the Bhagavad Gita, and he said that his only regret was not finishing the bombs early enough to nuke Germany instead of Japan. He basically had a raging boner for mass murder. Granted, his opinion about that did change over the years, but there was no guilt at the time he made the statement. I'm the destroyer of worlds, baby, yes! Regardless, Vallée was doing great, and he even had an exciting new scientific theory in which he was trying to unite the four fundamental forces of the universe: gravity, electromagnetism, and the weak and strong nuclear forces, which is indeed a noble aim. This was bold research, to be sure, but it was also far from a crackpot theory. He published his book on the topic in 1971, which was shortly after other physicists received Nobel Prizes for their theory unifying the electromagnetic and weak nuclear forces into the electro-weak force. Modern research and calculations also suggest that at high enough energy levels, meaning at almost impossibly high temperatures, that all four forces may indeed act as a single force. So, depending on what sort of theory Vallée came up with, he might have been onto something truly groundbreaking with his line of thinking. Unfortunately, what he came up with instead was some truly crackpot nonsense. I think we should start saying crackpipe nonsense. That feels more contemporary. Vallée argued that Einstein's theory of relativity was too complicated, impossibly so, and thus it must be wrong. Sounds like, Vallée, maybe your brain is just a bit too small to grasp it. More specifically, he claimed that such a detailed and intricate theory was incompatible with reality, which is a wild statement. Still, Vallée was of the opinion that scientists and the general public alike worshipped special relativity like it was some kind of religion. He explicitly referred to it as blind worship, despite the fact that relativity made specific predictions which could be tested and verified or indeed falsified. You know, the special quality of a theory that is required for it to be considered science, rather than just religion or bullshit. That said, we do know that relativity is incomplete. At some point, Einstein's theories will be supplanted by something even more advanced, just like his theories had done to Isaac Newton's. But because these theories will have to be even more complicated and detailed, I guess that means they'll be even less compatible with reality, according to René or whatever his name was. So what was Vallée's alternative theory? Well, that would be free energy, of course. Oh, fantastic. I'm so glad this all worked out and we solved all of the world's energy problems and climate change and pollution. Oh, it's nonsense. God, imagine if it wasn't like that. And unfortunately, this is incompatible with reality. Vallée believed that because all four of the fundamental forces were intertwined, they created diffuse electromagnetic energy that was present everywhere in the universe, including in matter. He referred to the combination of all of these energies as synergy, and he even came up with a very original equation to define synergy that is unlike anything you have seen before. S equals mc squared, where S equaled not only energy of an object, but also the diffuse energy around it as well. Alright, so basically just energy, like equals mc squared, plus, what was it called? Diffuse energy, which sounds made up. He also created the idea of synergetic potential, which was defined as the square of the propagation speed of electromagnetic waves in a vacuum filled with matter. Phi square of the propagation speed of electromagnetic waves in a vacuum filled with matter. Vacuum filled with matter? That doesn't make sense. It's not vacuum, is it? And also, wouldn't that just be the speed of light? Now, there are a couple of things to unpack there. First is that awkward phrasing, the propagation speed of electromagnetic waves in a vacuum. What Vallée was trying to refer to without actually saying it was the speed of light. God, sometimes I just have such a giant brain. Because Vallée didn't believe there was a speed of light. Bro, that we know. Since he was rejecting Einstein's theory of relativity, that meant he was also rejecting the idea that light had a constant speed in a vacuum. Not only could light go as fast as it wanted, but so could spaceships. Again, really nice that we figured all of this out and we do have, like, warp drive. It's fantastic. That would be cool if it was true, but it's not. Even more bizarre, however, was Vallée's mention of a vacuum filled with matter. By definition, a vacuum is almost completely devoid of matter. Empty space averages like 1 subatomic particle per cubic meter, but that's close enough to empty. But for all of this complex science talk, in the end, all Vallée was trying was attempting to build a perpetual motion machine. He even believed he created one with his experimental machine producing 4 times as much energy as it took in. Spoiler alert, I already promise you, no it doesn't. Now obviously nobody was able to replicate this experiment because perpetual motion is not real, but I guess Vallée believed that if he studied hard and became a real scientist, he could go on to sell people on this incomprehensibly convoluted theory of free energy. The scientific community did at least take his work seriously enough to properly refute the claims, but synergetic theory was pretty much unanimously rejected. Vallée took this to mean that he was being persecuted by the powers that be, and he publicly expressed his belief that his research was being unfairly discredited and dragged through the mud thanks to a conspiracy involving official science. Oh my god, sometimes it just... I was literally going to say he's being held down by big physics, but he literally thinks that he is. Wow. Global capitalism, and for some reason, the World Zionist Organization. I mean, it's not a good conspiracy theory without the G's, though, is it? Come on. He also believed that famed physicist Richard Feynman was a government man in black because... why the fuck not? Luckily for Vallée, he survived all the way until 2007. That meant that he had the opportunity to use the internet to spread his ridiculous theory far and wide, or as far and wide as possible at least. Synergetic theory did get some attention, become popular with fringe groups, but it has pretty much died off entirely. Unfortunately, the popularity of the overarching concept of free energy has yet to wane at all. No, because that'd be fantastic. Like, of course it would be popular. It's free energy. It solved an awful lot of problems. I don't know why people are so fascinated by something that even children should understand is impossible, but every day there are people that genuinely believe they have uncovered the secrets to perpetual motion. I mean, because people are allowed to believe in fun things, or like, at least entertain them. Like, people are like, oh, dragons are fun. And I'll just be like, well, dragons aren't real. And they'll be like, doesn't make them any less fun, does it, Simon? And I'll be like, well, kinda. Rupert Sheldrake, morphic resonance. It's a very another sciencey sounding one, isn't it? Once again, our story begins with a respected scientist. Rupert Sheldrake was a British researcher with a PhD in biochemistry from Cambridge University. Fairly impressive stuff right there. He even went on to work at Cambridge, Harvard, and as a researcher at the Royal Society. So not only is he a real scientist, he's a really impressive scientist. As far as academic credentials go, those are about as impressive as they come. And here's the thing though, Rupert was primarily a botanist and he earned his PhD by studying plant hormones and development. I'm going to get the feeling that he's going to talk about like maths. And look, there isn't anything wrong with that, and I'm certainly not disparaging botanists or the study of plants, but it is important to note that unlike animals, plants do not have brains. As such, a botanist may not have been the best person to come up with a radically new theory for animal psychology and development. I mean, right? Stay in your lane. It'd be like, I'm fairly decent at YouTube. That doesn't mean I'm decent at anything else. In fact, I'm quite bad at anything else, and it's just lucky that I'm reasonably good at this. Of course, while it was new to Rupert, it wasn't actually new. Rupert came up with his idea of morphic resonance at Cambridge, where it was immediately rejected. But when he travelled to India for work and shared his ideas there, they said it was something that had already been known for thousands of years. There was also a similar Western theory, collective unconscious, that had been proposed by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung just a few decades earlier. Jung's theory never caught on in the mainstream, and that didn't bode well for Rupert since his idea was far more woo-woo than what Jung had come up with. Also, Jung actually in this field. As for Rupert's idea, Simon, have you ever noticed how you can feel when someone is looking at the back of your head? No, I haven't, because that's not real. Or how it's much easier to do the newspaper crossword puzzle later in the day. No, I don't do the newspaper crossword puzzle, and also, I don't think it would be easier to do later in the day. I sometimes do the crossword. I went through a stage of doing the what's it called, the New York Times mini crossword or whatever. I'd do it when I woke up in the morning, I'd check my emails, do the crossword in bed, and I would try and get it under 60 seconds. So, no, I don't think doing it in the end of the day makes it easier. I'm guessing you answered yes to the first and no to the second. I answered no to both. But according to Rupert's theory of morphic resonance, the latter should be true as well. Originally proposed in his 1981 book, A New Science of Life, The Hypothesis of Morphic Resonance, Rupert proposed that knowledge was shared among all members of each species. This was done through the use of morphic fields, a very real thing that definitely existed and not bullshit pseudoscience that Rupert made up to justify his insane beliefs. Similar to fields that, actually exist, like the electromagnetic field, the morphic field was alleged to exist everywhere all at once. It also contained within it the combined experiences of all animals, but with the information magically partitioned for each different species. How can you possibly think this is real? This is why you could feel somebody's eyes on the back of your head, because the knowledge that they were looking at you was contained within the morphic field. No. Why? What's going on? It also meant that if you taught some lab rats to do a cute trick, unrelated rats on the opposite side of the world would be able to learn that trick even faster because the knowledge was already contained within the morphic field. You are crack pipe. This is beyond crackpot. This is crack pipe. And yes, it also meant that the New York Times crossword puzzle should be easier to do at night than in the morning. Oh, because everyone around the world has done it and somehow that information is going into this magical cloud that's somehow just out there in space, storing all of this information. Oh yes, and these collective memories existed not only across all of space, but all of time as well. Well, it's going to be very easy to solve the crossword because there'll be someone in the future who's looking at the solution and then sharing that. What are you talking about? This provided an explanation for how humans were able to continually advance our collective knowledge without having to relearn everything from scratch whenever new humans were born. No, look, there's that phrase, standing on the shoulders of giants. There's a reason that phrase exists. It's not from morphic resonance. It's from a body of knowledge that we built up over time. What the fuck? Of course, another explanation for that would be things like books and career specialization, but what the fuck do I know? Though according to Rupert, I guess the answer would be everything that every human has ever known. Indeed. Now, on its surface, this theory should be obviously false. As Exhibit A, I present to you stupid people. If morphic resonance existed, then logically there shouldn't be stupid people because of the shared collective memory of all of human knowledge or whatever. Nah, there'd still be stupid people, because you can learn stuff, but that doesn't mean you're able to process that information effectively if you're just a bit dim. The good news is that this theory should actually be possible to test, since one of the examples of ways morphic resonance impacts our lives was the sensation of someone staring at the back of your head. In that case, just set up an experiment to test that under laboratory conditions, and this has been done numerous times with inconsistent results. When the people running the experiments are believers in morphic resonance, they always get results that support the theory, whereas tests run by skeptics invariably do not get those same results. Luckily, Rupert had an answer to that. It's just a little thing I like to call fairy logic. Just like with Tinkerbell, the morphic field will die if people don't believe in it. That means that a test being run by skeptics would dampen the field and thus fail to produce the expected results. This fantastic quirk meant that Rupert's theory was completely unfalsifiable and thus in no way scientific. On a side note, if fairies were actually real and operated under this logic of needing attention to live, then Tinkerbell could become a Twitch streamer or an OnlyFans star. Be weird, and get so much attention that she's transformed into some sort of all-powerful, godlike creature, which isn't great since she's notoriously temperamental and vindictive. But I digress. I didn't know that about Tinkerbell. It's been a long time since I saw Peter Pan. Rupert's initial book caused quite a stir in the scientific community, not because his theory was groundbreaking or causing people to rethink human consciousness, but rather because of the reactions to it. The most notable of these was an editorial published in the journal Nature. That's a big one, titled A Book for Burning. I have to say, it's kind of surprising that Nature even took this remotely seriously. It should be just like, botanists, stick to your lane. While the author of the editorial did ultimately state that he didn't think people should burn Rupert's book, why the fuck not? There's nothing wrong with burning a book if it's a bit shit. I've burned books. He harshly criticized the work, writing, "Rupert's book is a splendid illustration of the widespread public misconception of what science is about. In reality, Rupert's argument is in no sense a scientific argument, but is an exercise in pseudoscience. Many readers will be left with the impression that Rupert has succeeded in finding a place for magic within scientific discussion." Now, this actually backfired slightly, as some people compared the vitriol against Rupert to the Galileo affair. Bro, chill out. Come on. But it still wasn't enough to move morphic resonance into the mainstream. After all, one of the big differences between those two things was that Galileo was actually correct, whereas Rupert was a fucking idiot. Had he just stuck with plants instead of inexplicably trying to revolutionize human psychology, who knows what Rupert might have been able to accomplish over his career. Honestly, he did quite a lot. He was a member of wasn't he a member of the Royal Society or a teaching at something? Cambridge, Harvard? Bro's got a big brain. Instead of making scientific achievements, his most recent books all seem to be about examining religion through an allegedly scientific lens. And I say allegedly because his most recent book appears to have presented a pseudoscientific explanation for all the healing power of prayer. Not a real thing. This may all be nonsense, but to Rupert's credit, at least he's consistent. Moses Cotsworth, International Fixed Calendar. This sounds like, don't we have a fixed calendar? Everyone's in agreement that it's July right now. The majority of the world has been using the Gregorian calendar as the standard for over 400 years now, and with good reason. When the Julian calendar was created, it was believed that the solar year was exactly 365.25 days. The results were a calendar with 365 days per year and a leap day every 4 years. Sounds very similar to what we have now, but there's that change every couple hundred years or something, right?
Yep.
That worked great for a while, but the solar year is actually slightly shorter than that. As a result, the Julian calendar was adding an extra day every 128 years or so. Again, that was fine for a long time, but after about 1500 years of this, they had added almost 2 weeks worth of days. This meant things like equinoxes were occurring almost 2 weeks earlier than the calendar said they should, and it was really starting to fuck things up. If people were still on the Julian calendar, the spring equinox would practically be in February at this point. Needless to say, the seasons were shifting enough on the calendar to become confusing, so scholars in the Catholic Church got to work calculating a new way to handle leap years, such that the calendar would remain in sync with the solar year forever. After intensive research and calculations, they were able to more accurately measure how long one trip around the sun took, which was 365.2425 days. Just as a comment, it's fucking cool that they could figure this out so long ago. If someone said to me today, if they took away the internet from me and said, "Simon, work out how long the year is." Because I know it's 365 days and there's a leap year, but I didn't know it's 2425. If someone said, "Go figure that out," and they gave me a bunch of books that were available to these... Let's say they gave me a bunch of books that were available to me in the 80s, but nothing specific to this. No shot I'd figure it out. Like I said, the original number wasn't that far off, but after 1500 years, it became clear that we needed a new calendar. And by a new calendar, I mean exactly the same calendar with a more complicated rule for leap years. Instead of a leap year every 4 years, now we have a leap year every 4 years, unless the year is a multiple of 100, and then unless the year is a multiple of 400. So 1800 and 1900 were not leap years, but 2000 was. This was a vast improvement, and instead of the calendar adding an extra day every 128 years, we're now doing it only every 7,700 years or so. That's a huge improvement, and in terms of properly calculating the frequency of leap days, the Gregorian calendar is great. But from a practical standpoint, the calendar also kinda sucks. If you're not sure why, allow me to refresh your memory. 30 days has September, April, June, and December, all the rest have 31 except February, which has 28 or sometimes 29. Yeah, it's not easy. I just do the knuckle thing, like January, February, March, April, May, June, July, or, The knuckle thing. Our calendar is such shit that we can't even come up with a workable rhyme to say how many days each month has. Unfortunately, Simon is too much of a big brain to have fallen for this, but because there are a bunch of months that rhyme, there's a non-zero chance that some of you listening wouldn't have noticed that I incorrectly said that December has 30 days instead of November. Oh, yeah, I didn't even notice. I do the knuckle thing, Kevin. It's annoying, but it's... Oh, also, I just remember, like August, 31. March, 31. I thought it would come to me immediately. But according to Moses Cotsworth, it was, as he invented an alternate calendar back in 1902, officially called the International Fixed Calendar, better known as the Cotsworth Calendar. And let me tell you, it takes some real balls to call your creation the International Fixed Calendar. It would be like me buying a bunch of data centers, covering the ocean in fiber optic cables, and calling my creation the Better Internet. To be fair though, the bar for a better version of the internet is extremely low at this point. Of course, Cotsworth didn't actually change how leap years were calculated. So what did he claim to have actually fixed? Well, Cotsworth had the incredibly novel idea to create a calendar containing 13 months of 28 days each. Well, oh, please tell me he'd be like, yeah, and we're going to call the 13-month Cotsworth Ember. Cotsember. The world had never seen anything quite like this, except for 50 years earlier, when the French philosopher and mathematician Auguste Comte proposed literally the exact same thing. The only difference with the proposals was that Cotsworth kept all the original month names and added a 13th month, Sol, between June and July. Comte had renamed all of the months after historical figures, so if you were born near the end of the summer instead of being born in August or September, you would have been born in Gutenberg or Shakespeare. That's kind of cool. Weird, Comte's idea never caught on. At least Cotsworth wasn't trying to upend everything, and we'd get to keep the original names of months, just with a bonus month thrown in to make things just a little bit more confusing. So what was the alleged advantage of this? And the answer was simple: consistency. All 13 months would have the same number of days, and because each month was exactly 4 weeks, then the months would be identical. Yeah, this is like, there's a type of calendar like this. I always felt it was a bit of a scam when I'd rent an apartment, and they'd be like, yeah, no, 13 months, yeah. It's like, wait, what does that mean? It means we bill you every 4 weeks, fuck. Like, oh, what? You said it was like so much a month. You meant every 4 weeks, you little bastard. The first of every month was always a Monday, 20th was always a Saturday, and so on. And there certainly is something to be said for that level of consistency. Yeah, that actually does sound kind of awesome. That just brings us to the elephant in the room, which is that 13 months of 28 days is only 364 days, not 365. And that is where the Year Day came in. Year Day was a special day that took place between December 28th and January 1st. It was a sort of no man's land, a 24-hour holiday that was not part of any month and had no day of the week. That sounds kind of awesome. I'm kind of down with this. Everyone gets a holiday? Yes! If we lived in the world of the Purge, that's the day it would have taken place. As for leap days, there was a simple plan for that as well. My first instinct would be to put leap day next to year day to give people an extra long vacation, but that might be too much all at once. Reconcile 2 days off. Back to the mines! Reconciling the fact that yesterday was Sunday, today is nothing, and tomorrow is Monday would be confusing enough on year day, and I can imagine adding an extra nothing day alongside it could just be jarring. Since Cotsworth didn't want the bonus days next to one another, the solution was instead to put it in the middle of the year between June 8th and Sol 1. The International Fixed Calendar wasn't the dumbest idea in the world, it was just unnecessary. I like it! This is the first one I'm kind of down with. It wasn't improving how we measure time. It does make it easier for everyone, like the change from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar did. It was just restructuring that time for little benefit. It sounds awesome that every 20th is a Saturday. That just sounds really good. The consistency a calendar like this would provide is nice, but it can also suck. Being born in December is shitty enough, but having my birthday fall on a Tuesday every year would be even more miserable. That's a fair point. You're never getting your birthday on the weekend if you're born on a Tuesday. That's a fair point. Personally, I like things that change, and barring leap year shenanigans, each date shifts forward 1 day of the week every year. There are a bunch of other problems with Cotsworth's solution as well, such as the Jews. always the Jews. The Jewish Sabbath is definitionally every 7 days, so year day would displace the Sabbath by a day every year. We saw something similar during the French Revolution when they tried out a calendar with a 10-day week. The Jewish population continued to rest on the Sabbath regardless of what day of the week it fell on the silly French calendar, and this caused a lot of tension with the authorities. Also, having 12 months a year is pretty useful, even if they're inconsistent. 12 is a highly composite number, so you can easily cut it in half, thirds, quarters, or even sixths if you wanted to for some reason. In fact, there's a reasonable argument that it would have been better if humans used base 12 instead of base 10 for this very reason, but we only have 10 fingers, so base 10 was more intuitive. If we'd been born with 12 fingers, imagine how easy everything would be. Regardless, since 13 is a prime number, you can't easily do any of these calculations. However, it's worth noting that Cotsworth hadn't created this new plan out of thin air. In the 1920s, the League of Nations was trying to simplify and standardize calendars and time worldwide. They had already created a standard time, and the League solicited proposals for new calendars. Of the 130 calendars presented, Cotsworth was selected as the best one. The League of Nations obviously failed to adopt this calendar, as you well know, but in 1928, while the League was still debating whether or not to switch calendars, George Eastman adopted the calendar for internal use at the business he founded, Eastman Kodak Company. You've heard of that one. For reasons known only to Kodak, they continued the calendar internally all the way until 1989. It's the sort of inexplicable business decision that happens once in a blue moon, which, using Cotsworth calendar, would literally be never. There'll also be no Friday the 13th, which is fine, because Jason sucks. Nikolai Fedorkin, polywater. Alright, it's time to travel back to the Soviet Union, where an incredible discovery was made back in 1961. Physicist Nikolai Fedorkin was experimenting with water running through narrow quartz tubes. Unclear exactly what his goal was, but the actual results were well beyond anything that he could have imagined. Using this seemingly simple process, Nikolai transformed ordinary water into a new substance. This new substance was named polywater, as its defining characteristic was that it was a polymerized form of water, meaning that the water molecules bound together to form long chains. Oh, I don't quite know what that would do. Polywater looked like regular water, but it had a higher boiling point, a lower freezing point, and dramatically increased viscosity, almost like a syrup. The boiling point had been increased to 150 degrees Celsius, and the freezing point was lowered to minus 40 degrees Celsius. So basically, 50 degrees in either direction. Even though I don't know what exactly you'll do with this discovery, I'm sure there had to be plenty of industrial and scientific uses for water that was more resistant to temperature. Yeah, I'm certain this would be fairly handy. The first to pick up on Nikolai's discovery was Boris Derjagin. Oh God. A director at the let's just call him Boris, alright? He's Russian, it's easy. A director at the Institute for Physical Chemistry in Moscow. Boris was able to improve upon Nikolai's work by discovering a new process by which polywater could be created. This new process produced only a small amount of polywater at a time, but it was still much faster overall than Nikolai's method. The two began experimenting with the new material to test its limits, like the aforementioned boiling and freezing points, and they published their results in Soviet science journals. But, as evidenced by the fact that I refer to Nikolai as a Soviet scientist, this was during the Cold War. There wasn't exactly a lot of cooperation and information sharing between the Soviets and the West at the time. Some short summaries of the research were published in English, but nobody really noticed. For 6 years, polywater was exclusively the purview of the Soviets. Then in 1966, Boris traveled to a chemistry convention in England. This time, Boris had the opportunity to present his research to the scientific community in person, and this time they took notice in a big way. British scientists immediately began their own research into polywater, though research didn't really get underway in the United States until 2 years later. However, there was one American who did take an interest in polywater, a man by the name of John D.F. Black. Chances are, you got no idea who that is, but John is the reason that the word polywater may be causing Simon to feel a hint of recognition clawing away at the back of his brain. It didn't, Kevin, and I don't know why. I don't feel I've ever heard of polywater. John was a writer for the original Star Trek series. I've not seen the original one. I saw like a couple of episodes and I was like, this is just beyond dated. I just couldn't do it. And he included polywater as a plot device in the 1966 episode The Naked Time. By the way, it's crazy that Star Trek, the original series, was 1960s? William Shatner's still around. In the show, polywater was a strange type of... I hope I haven't cursed that. Is William Shatner still alive? I hope so. He was fantastic in Boston Legal. still alive. I like he's 94. Shit, dude. He looks good for 94, though. In the show, polywater was a strange type of water caused by collapsing supergiant stars, and it infected the crew of the Enterprise, making everyone really violent, horny, and emotional. Makes sense. So basically, as if they were all super drunk. I know Simon has no love for the original Star Trek, but Star Trek The Next Generation did a sequel to this episode called The Naked Now, which also used polywater. Oh my god, I don't remember that at all. It even infected Data, not because that made any logical sense, but seeing robots acting wacky was all the rage in the 1980s. Oh, maybe this was a first season of The Next Generation? The first season's really weird. I bet it's first season. First season of Star Trek The Next Generation was, like, really odd. The Naked Now. TNG. Third episode of the first season. Of course it was. Anyway, once the United States finally began researching polywater in 1968, word of this new miracle substance began spreading throughout the media. This led to two very popular concerns regarding polywater. The first was that this new compound could replicate itself if it came into contact with regular water. There's no reason to think that this would happen, but enough people would read Kurt Vonnegut's book Cat's Cradle to make a connection in their minds between polywater and Ice 9, with fears that polywater would lead to some sort of doomsday scenario, just like in Vonnegut's book, which I would like to remind the people of the 1960s was a work of fiction. Indeed. The other fear was that there was some sort of polywater gap growing between the United States and the Soviets. I like that this whole thing is just not real. It's so Cold War-esque that this was a concern. There were talks about bomber gaps and missile gaps with regard to the ability to create and deploy nuclear missiles, and now there was a polywater gap. The USSR seemed to be defeating America at every turn, with the space race being the one arena in which the US finally seemed to be emerging victorious. Not only had the Soviets been working with and creating polywater for longer than the United States had, US scientists didn't even seem to be able to make it at all. Wait, was this all just a big ploy by the Soviet Union? Like, they were just like, let's make something up. Let's just make up that we have some shit. And the US, worst case, best case, or like, whatever happens, they're going to spend a ton of time trying to figure it out, which is a good waste of resources for them, while we just made that shit up. Some of the experiments were successful, but most of them failed to yield the same results Nikolai and Boris had got. Many of the scientific community began to question the validity of polywater, because that's what happens when someone publishes research that they can't reliably reproduce. And that's when American scientist Dennis Rousseau had an idea. Dennis played a game of handball at Bell Labs where he worked. Okay. Then he collected his sweat. After running some tests, his sweat seemed to have identical properties to polywater. He proposed that polywater was nothing more than ordinary water containing impurities like sodium and chlorine. This was a devastating blow, but Boris wasn't ready to give up on the miraculous new discovery. It's like, well done, Boris. You've discovered sweat, mate. He gave all of his glassware the best cleaning he possibly could, ran his experiments again, and realized what an ass Nikolai had made of him. Not that Nikolai did it intentionally, but when properly washing all of the equipment used in the experiments, the resulting substance was just regular water. It turned out polywater really was nothing more than water that was full of impurities, which likely called into question the cleanliness of Soviet labs in general. Boris published a paper in Nature admitting that they had goofed and that polywater wasn't real, and against all odds, that was actually the end of it. Not only was polywater considered fully debunked by the entire scientific community, even the people who first claimed to have discovered it, but there were no lingering polywater truthers out there claiming that the substance was real and that the government was lying to us about the magical healing properties of polywater that could cure all disease and put Big Pharma out of business, or whatever the fuck nonsense conspiracy theorists would have come up with. Kevin, you've given me an idea. Polywater.com/Blaze. I forgot what channel this was for a second. That said, there is now an American company named Polywater, but they have nothing to do with the fabled substance. Hell, they don't even sell water. Miles Mathis. All of math and physics is wrong. When it comes to lunatics who believe they revolutionized math and science, there is probably no name more iconic than Miles Mathis. I feel like I've heard of this name. Miles has published about 8,000 pages of so-called research, and his existence was pretty much the inspiration for the creation of the subreddit r/badmathematics. There is no way I could possibly talk about all of his insane theories in a single episode, and frankly, I just don't want to. Thanks to years of writing for Simon, I've got a lot of experience reading about and subsequently explaining complex ideas in maths and science. One of the things that makes that possible is that even if the concepts are at the very edge of what I'm able to comprehend, it all does make logical sense.
Logic, bitch!
That's what I was saying earlier. Like, I might not have the most giant brain in the world, but you can see it makes sense. If someone explains it to me, I'll be like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Whereas when it's just like nonsense, you're like, wait, I don't get it. And they'll be like, yeah, but this to this. And you'll be like, no, not that to that. That doesn't make sense. Like, I remember learning like simultaneous equations at school or whatever, and I was like, oh, man, this is really complicated. I just don't get it. But then eventually you get it, and you're like, okay, cool, this makes sense. The problem with trying to explain complex theories from idiots is that their work is just impossible to follow. It's similar to reading about quantum physics, except everything is incorrect and incoherent in a way that makes trying to pass the actual arguments mentally taxing in a way that I'm just not prepared to handle. No, because it's also mentally taxing in a way that's just a massive waste of time, because you'll mentally tax yourself and realize, well, that was all pointless, wasn't it? Because we're not actually getting anywhere. I probably should have thought about that before pitching this episode, but honestly, I thought most of the stuff I found would be no more complicated than Terence Howard's hilarious paper. Wait, Terence Howard actually wrote a paper? I just thought he spouts this nonsense on like the Joe Rogan Experience. But Mars has proven me wrong by writing page after page of equations interspersed with the most needlessly complex words possible. I think the idea was to leave the reader so confused and unable to understand what they were reading that they would assume Miles's ideas must be correct, otherwise they wouldn't sound complicated. Yeah, but the problem is, that can fool a regular person like me. I'll just be like, oh, this is over my head. But it wouldn't fool like someone in that field who's got a giant brain. So at some point you're going to trip up, mate. However, nothing could be further from the truth. Now, I'm not going to bother going into details about most of Miles's individual claims because they're too numerous and convoluted. However, he does have one overarching thesis that is the bedrock of his work. Everything in maths and physics since Isaac Newton is wrong. All of it. We need to turn back the clock a few hundred years throughout the work of all of these charlatans masquerading as scientists and accept that he is the greatest mathematician of all time. Indeed. Two of his boldest mathematical claims are that pi equals exactly 4. It does not. Like, even I know that. And that all of calculus is wrong. His belief that calculus is wrong stems from his argument that derivatives, used in calculus, have been incorrectly defined, and as a result, any work that was built on top of those incorrect calculations must also be wrong. As proof of this claim, he linked to another paper he wrote in which he tried to redefine what a derivative was. It's not how it works. This is a common tactic employed by Miles as he loves using references to his own work to prove his own work. It's the most circular logic ever. The only problem with that, other than the rampant narcissism, is that none of his work has ever been validated by anyone, particularly because all of it is either obviously wrong or just entirely untestable. As for the claim that pi equals 4, Miles did include a caveat to that. He stated that on paper, pi comes out to 3.14, etc., but that in the real world, time has to be factored into pi, and that by accounting for time, the value becomes 4. I'm not sure how that's supposed to make sense, especially because it would mean pi is a variable instead of a constant, but that doesn't matter. Whether you've ever attempted to calculate pi by hand or not, and unless you're Matt Parker, why would you have? Everybody knows that pi is the ratio of a circle's circumference and its diameter. Divide the circumference by the diameter, you get pi. And the more accurate your measurements can be, the more accurate your value for pi will be. And to that, Miles just says, nuh-uh. He claims that this is how people in ancient times calculated pi, but they were wrong. According to Miles, quote, quantitatively, this may be the biggest error in all of math and physics, since every single physical equation with pi in it must now be thrown out and redone. And in the thousands of years that have passed since then, nobody except him has ever noticed this embarrassing blunder. Or maybe someone did notice, but they were subsequently silenced by big mathematics, because Miles isn't a quack scientist or mathematician, he's a raging conspiracy theorist as well. Of course he is. His theories are so outrageous that even Alex Jones would look at Miles and say, this guy's gone off the deep end. What sort of conspiracies does Miles believe in, you ask? Well, to start, there's a theory that all of math and science is not only wrong, but intentionally wrong. These false narratives have been pushed by a shadowy cabal for reasons? And this has been going on since at least the time of Shakespeare. All right. I mean, I don't even know what to say. It's just absurd. Not that Shakespeare was a real person, of course. And no, Miles isn't claiming that Shakespeare's plays were written by the Earl of Oxford, because that would be far too straightforward of a claim. Instead, Miles believes that Shakespeare's works were created by a committee of co-conspirators, part of a larger plot to intentionally dumb down both entertainment and education so people would be too stupid to understand or oppose the broader conspiracy at play. Bro, even Alex Jones would be like, what's wrong with this guy? There isn't any evidence for these claims, of course, but maybe he believed that Shakespeare was designed to dumb people down because he loved filling his scripts with dick jokes and sexual innuendo, but they were very clever dick jokes and sexual innuendo, which, since I love filling my scripts with dick jokes and innuendo, would mean I'm part of the conspiracy as well, I guess, and also basically a disciple of Shakespeare, Kevster. The conspiracies don't stop there, though. According to Miles, pretty much everything that's ever happened was faked. From Lincoln's assassination to the French Revolution to the Zodiac killers, these events were all staged by the real people in power. We're getting to the stage. I don't think Miles is just a crackpipe. I think he's mentally unwell, because this is like proper batty. I'm not sure who all those people were supposed to be hundreds of years ago, but I know who they are now. The Kennedys. You see, JFK couldn't have been assassinated. Just because there's video evidence of Kennedy's head exploding, which I had to watch frame by frame like 100 times while writing an episode of Decoding the Unknown. Yeah, I've unfortunately seen that. It's not something that you want to see. That doesn't mean that he actually died. That was a body double. Or maybe the video wasn't real. It doesn't matter how it happened. All that mattered was that JFK faked his own death, and the Kennedy family have been ruling the United States in the shadows from Martha's Vineyard ever since. RFK Jr.'s fucking all that up. They're like, get back in the shadows, RFK. No, I don't want to get back. Only Richard Nixon ever attempted to expose this conspiracy, and they had to frame him for covering up Watergate to shut him up. Of course, the Kennedys can't control the entire world by themselves. They're just a small piece of the broader conspiracy of gay Jews who have been ruling the world for at least the last century, and everyone was involved. Joseph Stalin, gay Jew. John Lennon, gay Jew. Adolf Hitler, gay-ass Jew. It also turns out that everyone in the comments who's ever accused Simon and myself of being CIA assets was correct. Shh, Kevin. Shh. Miles didn't explicitly call us out by name, but basically everyone you can think of is either a CIA asset, one of those gay Jews that they work for, or a famous person you thought died but is actually still alive. Or in the case of Stephen Hawking, someone who died years before it was reported he did and was replaced with an imposter. To be fair to Miles, though, that last one isn't necessarily impossible. Claims of body doubles are usually ridiculous, but I doubt anyone would have had too much trouble replicating Hawking's behavioral quirks and speech mannerisms. Savage, Kevster. So why am I telling you all of this? Wouldn't it be dangerous to so thoroughly unveil the massive global conspiracy to the public? No. Not at all, because statistically, you're all in on it anyway. If we were to assume that everything Miles believes is in fact true, up to and including that pi equals 4, the scope of the resulting conspiracy would require hundreds of millions of people to be in on it, maybe even billions. Although, at that point, it kind of just stops being a conspiracy, doesn't it, and just becomes our shared reality. But that's exactly Miles's point. We're sharing a fake reality built on faulty math, science, and gay Jewish Kennedys. But don't take my word for it. You can read all 8,000 pages of scientific gibberish on Miles' own website. Or if you just want some of the conspiratorial highlights, he has compelling books available, such as The Ultimate Fake Person Award, about how Mark Zuckerberg is an artificial creation of the intelligence community and not a real person, and Looks Like JFK Was Gay, and other interesting news. Which is a real title of a book. There we go. Thanks for watching. Fucking insanity, dudes.